this is something that I read your personal article on, and I really loved it. I tweeted it out, and I'll make sure to probably find it and add it to the chat later. But Kevin, you wanted to talk about this, and I feel like this sort of ties in with just the Phoenix Suns season as a whole, man. And no, it's not Nick Richards being a serial. It's the Phoenix Suns' past mistakes are starting to catch up with them, and I feel like sort of the key words there are, well, first off, past, but then catching up, because we're what, year 3, year 2.5 of the whole Kevin Durant, Matt Ishbia era, the most expensive team in NBA history. It's starting to catch up, man. So Kevin, if you need any, if you want me to share any part of that article, I'm sure I can, but do you want to talk to us about what past mistakes are catching up to the Phoenix Suns, how it's affecting them now, and how it might affect them later? Because I know a lot of Suns fans are like, rebuild, blow it up, get all of our draft picks back, yada, yada, yada. But Kevin, there's been a lot of other mistakes that the Suns have made that, again, are catching up. So Kevin, talk to us, man.
Absolutely. So I really didn't go over the eight and over Luca thing. I think
Yeah.
everybody's kind of resigned to the fact that that was probably the biggest blunder in franchise history at this point. It's really, really hard to justify that even going back and looking at Aiton as a prospect because I feel like pretty much everybody had him number one, but it's not a big man's league anymore, at least not DA big man's league.
Yeah.
Um, so I started out in the post-bubble world, November 2020, when they took Jalen Smith number 10.
Yep.
And that's no disrespect to Jalen Smith whatsoever. He's carved out a nice niche in the league. He's a quality rotation player. But at the time, that was a puzzling pick even back then. He was it was like Cam Johnson, but he didn't really have a fit on the team unlike Cam. He was 25 to 30 on most prospect big board rankings. You already had DA obviously in place. You brought in JaVale the year after, and
JaVale McGee.
you had Dario too. You had a revolving door
My
of
boy
quality big
Dario.
man.
Yep.
You didn't really have any spot for him to grow into his own and throw him into the fire, especially after you traded for CP3. That was the sign that you're going in. You're not really focusing on
The
putting
youth.
the youth movement in a focus. And in that case, you take somebody who's pro ready. You take a Tyrese Halliburton. You take a Desmond Bane at number 10. Even a Tyrese Maxey. He was young, but he was pro ready pretty much
Yes.
from day one.
He was a
You take
bucket
one
in
of those
college.
guys, and best case, I guess it's two best case scenarios. One best case scenario, you get one of those guys to grow into their own alongside CP3 and Book, and they're able to turn into the players that they are today. Best case scenario number two, you're able to move one of those guys for KD down the road if you don't win that 2021 finals, and you don't have to give up Cam, you don't have to give up McHale, and you have a much more well-rounded roster to work with. Uh, Either way, that's a phenomenal outcome, and I feel like that's one that they're really, really looking back at and is haunting them right now.
Yeah. I remember that,
I
man.
think
I was growing on YouTube then, and I remember I was baffled when we drafted Jalen Smith. Nothing against his talent. I wasn't furious. I was just like, what? They drafted Jalen Smith.
mhm.
I'll be real. I didn't even know that much about him. And I kid you not, man. My content creator friend, Romp 2.0, he just goes by Romp now. But he literally texted me. He said, watch the Suns draft Jalen Smith. And that was moments before it happened, and they happened. I'm sure I still have that text message. He said, watch them draft Jalen Smith, and they did. And here we are, Kevin, catching up to the Phoenix Suns, past mistakes. I will never forget that moment, man. They did it, and he doesn't even play for us anymore. So, but he has had a good
Most
career.
frustrating.
He's still in the league.
Yep, he is, and he's playing pretty well, shooting like
Yeah.
38% from three right now.
Yep.
I was gonna say the most frustrating thing about that, I also had that in my piece, was that they ended up moving him for Torrey Craig,
Yep.
and they let Torrey Craig walk in free agency the summer before.
Yeah, that
So it
was
was kind of a
baffling.
pointless. why did you let Torrey Craig walk in the first place if you were just going to bring him back a few months later? Why did you attach a draft pick to it? It just that whole saga just made no sense to me specifically. Um, so I think I'm gonna move on to the next phase of
Yeah,
all this.
go for it.
I think one of the really, really big mistakes that they made was that they prolonged the Kevin Durant saga because the ball was in their court the whole time. They could have had a deal if they wanted to include McHale from the jump, and they refused to include McHale until Matt took over. And that was obviously the catalyst. You don't get that deal done unless Matt takes over uh,
Yeah.
conveniently on the trade deadline day or the day before.
Yep.
Um, it's just baffling. It kind of makes you think that when Sarver was suspended, he kind of gave the interim Garvin, he gave him
Sam Garvin.
the
Yeah.
red light to, he did not give him the green light to get a trade pushed through, which I'm not surprised by that. It's disappointing, but that no matter what angle you take a look at that with, it was very much a blunder. You could have had KD and Book playing together from game one that season, and if that was the case, you're probably looking at a much more favorable playoff bracket outcome that year because you
Yep.
went 44 and 38. You were the number 4 seed, and that means that you ran into the Nuggets and you pushed the Nuggets to 6, even with a couple of blowout losses. If you get the 2 or 3 seed, who's to say you can't make the conference finals that year and have a chance to make the finals, especially with a full year of KD and Book continuity built up? You only got 8 games of them in the regular season together, so it's just it kind of baffles me. It kind of wasted a full season in that manner.
Yeah. It's tough too because, new owner syndrome, if you will. And in all fairness, I can't blame Matt Ishbia for doing it. That's just my personal opinion. I'm a little bit of a Matt Ishbia stan, but I mean, what was he supposed to do, man? Like, we got eliminated and blown out by the Mavericks the following year before the KD trade. And then, we got embarrassed by the Nuggets, I think. That feels so long ago. I can't
Mhm.
even remember, but back-to-back embarrassing playoff losses. And I feel like some Suns fans forget that. That's just my personal opinion. But anyways, what other Phoenix Suns past mistakes are catching up to them, Kevin? Because I'm
The
sure there's a
elephant
whole
in the
list.
room, the Bradley Beal trade.
Yeah.
Actually, before that, I want to go to Frank Vogel. I just thought of that.
Okay. We sort of talked
I'm
about
not
that
gonna
earlier,
trash
but
on Vogel. I'm
yeah.
not gonna trash on Vogel because I think that he is a very quality NBA coach, and he proved that over the last decade plus.
Yep.
But it kind of felt like that was just a uh, how do I put this? Like a square peg in a round hole from the start. Felt like they were trying to make something work that just wasn't stylistically in line with what Vogel wanted to do, forcing Kevin Young to be on his staff, uh, and more or less run the offense, the de facto offensive coordinator. Uh, the chemistry was just off. Uh, I was getting word as early as the first month of the season that year that there was already a disconnect between the locker room and the coaches. There was a faction of the locker room that was siding more with Kevin Young, and there was a faction that was more with Vogel. And you could see some of that play out on the court during that season. So I kind of feel like they just wasted a whole season trying to make something work that they knew wasn't going to work. And being totally honest, if Budenholzer was ready to coach 2 years ago, he would have been the hire, but
Oh
he kind
yeah.
of took his name out because his brother passed away like during that
Yeah.
playoff series before
Mhm.
the loss. So I feel like he kind of needed that year to regroup, and that's like absolutely all means to him. Yeah, do that. Like you have to put your well-being first.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
but if I'm being honest, I feel like they could a trial run head coach. They could have done better in terms of fit with the franchise specifically. Because Vogel's probably the best coach they could have gotten that was available on the market. But they could have gotten like a Jordy Fernandez. You look at what he's doing in Brooklyn right now. He could have been the jolt of energy that the franchise needed. And who's to say that he wouldn't be a long term head coach? Because he's kind of been uh, he's been really acclaimed across the league for several years now. He coached Team Canada in the Olympics.
Yep.
Uh, De'Aaron Fox credited him with developing him. Nikola Jokic and Yusuf Nurkic, both when he was with Denver. Uh, he's a phenomenal coach, and he was on the market. Uh, it's just that's just one thing that you look back and you're like, man, they kind of, I want to say wasted a full season, but they definitely didn't go all out like we thought they did. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. Um, any final takeaways, or something you wrote about the Phoenix Suns' past mistakes that are catching up to them before we move on?
So like I said, the obvious one is Beal.
Yeah.
Um, with the second apron, that severely limits what they can do in the future. Pretty much all their future first round picks starting in 2032 are going to be frozen at the end of the first round if they don't get out of it. The no trade, allowing the no trade clause to stay in that deal was a huge blunder as well, because I believe it would have been far easier to move him if they had talked him into taking that out. Um, and just at the end of the day, Brad's a good player. He's a great dude. He's a great representative of the city, but
Yes.
he's just too
Mhm.
redundant next to Book. It's just
It
they've
just doesn't
kind
work.
of exhausted all options to try and find a fit, and it's just not working. Like
Yeah.
they could have just waited it out with CP3. Honestly, they could have just paid him what he was owed and brought him back on bird rights the year after, and they would have had a lot more flexibility to make a trade for like Jimmy Butler. They could have brought in James Harden at a reduced rate, because I know Harden's had a desire to come back to the Valley in the past. That's just one thing. That's the main thing that's like really hamstringing them, like at this moment specifically. I also want to briefly touch on the free agent signings they made. Like we talked about at the beginning of the show, like the Keita Bates Diops, the Yuta
Hmm.
Watanabes. Those guys look great on paper. It looked like,
Mason
oh yeah,
Plumley.
around three megastar players. These
Hmm.
guys are going to their best qualities are going to shine, and that just wasn't the case. Wasn't really ever the case outside maybe a couple of game flashes from like Chimezi Metu, that one. I think it was a Christmas Day game where he had like
Yeah.
19 rebounds. It just really didn't work out. And also how they handled the trade season this year. That's just the way they handled the KD saga, the trading the 2031 unprotected pick for three lower value first round picks.
Yep.
It just all of it's just a mess, and they're going to have to do a lot of damage control to make up for it.
Yep. I don't really know if I have anything to add to that, man. That was well said. And that's why you're on this channel, man, because you bring a different perspective and opinion and some great insight.